Hey, my name's Seth. In case we haven't had the opportunity to meet those of you joining us online, thanks for being a part of our service via technology. I am one of the pastors here. I hope I continue being a pastor here after we finish this series, Fixing America, because you just never know, right? I mean, you just never know what's going to happen with that. But, some of you are here in the room today and you're thinking, oh no, just when I started liking this church, they didn't talk about politics. They didn't tell you how to vote. They didn't, and so you're a little bit nervous because let's be honest, the churches that are vocal right now about politics tend to be a little bit right-leaning, MAGA-oriented churches, and so you might be a little concerned about that, but I want to set your mind at ease. We're not going to talk about that. For some of you here, you're thinking, I was wondering how long it would take, right, for somebody to begin talking about this and to get on stage and, because, America's going to hell in a handbasket and we've lost our way and yada, yada, yada. And I get all that, right? But you might be a little bit disappointed in what we're going to talk about in this series because we're not really going to talk too much about politics. I actually have good news for all sides. And this is kind of interesting because whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian or an I don't care-ian, right? I mean, you just because there are some of you in here, right? Regardless of where you come from, we all finally have something in common right now in America. You know what we have in common? We're all convinced America is broken. Right? I mean, that's kind of what unites us right now. It's kind of interesting that this is what unites us, that brokenness is the thing that we look at and say, yeah, we can get on board with that. Yes, we all agree. A couple of weeks ago, I put a post on Facebook, and so if you're my friend, you might have seen this. If you're my friend on Facebook, I should say, you might have seen this. But I asked the question, right, what do you think is broken in America? What needs to be fixed in America? And I got to tell you that the responses I got were absolutely fascinating to me, and they were fascinating for a couple of reasons. One, it came from the left and from the right. There were Democrats who answered, there were Republicans who answered, there were Christians who answered, there were non-Christians, maybe even atheists, agnostics who answered. And to see the responses, I mean, my guess is you're going to be able to relate to some of these. Here's what you all said, right? Things like healthcare, prescription drugs, civil discourse, generational relationships, lack of being bold, forgiveness. And that lack of being bold is about the church not being bold enough, just to clarify. Cancel culture, foster care, mental health, media bias, work ethic, respect for authority, parenting, self-entitlement, government, respect of others, mass shootings, drugs, selfish behavior, lack of love thy neighbor, lack of accountability, and confusing our privileges with our rights. Did we cover it all? Yeah, I mean, can you relate to this verse, or this verse? Can you relate to these responses? This is not a verse, just to clarify. Can you relate to these responses? I mean, I heard a statistic, all statistics are made up on the spot, just like that one. But I heard a statistic that more than 70% of Americans right now believe the country is headed in the wrong direction. That's Democrats, that's Republicans, right? I mean, if it's 70% of us, it can't just be one party or the other. And so the thing is, when I read this list, one, some of them surprised me a little bit just because I didn't know there was so much energy around those areas, and that's not what I would have picked out. But as they shared it, it's like, oh yeah, I can see that. And I don't think there's a single one on here that I don't see to some level or another, and an opportunity at some level or another to try and fix America. We know something needs to be different. It's the different that we disagree on, right? It's the different. That which way do we go? How do we fix this? How do we handle this problem? About 5 years ago, I was reading USA Today, which is supposedly a nonpartisan, news source. Think what you want about it. But I was reading it, and there was an editorial in there, and I've shared this before if you've been around, but in this editorial, the woman who wrote it was talking about how she believes America's just broken up into these boxes right now. And if it applied 5 years ago, I absolutely think it applies now. Here's the first box. It's the heartless, bigoted, conservative box. And then there's the whiny, bleeding heart liberal box. And then there's a third box. You know what the third box is? It's the I'm right box. Not as in like right politically, just I'm correct. My view is the correct view. I see it right. Everybody else is in one extreme or the other. If only they would listen to me, I could fix the problems in our country. How many of you have ever felt that way? Like, if only they would listen to my point of view, we could fix things. Am I the only one who's ever felt that way? Right? Yeah, a couple of you. Yeah, okay, three of us have felt that way. Just like you could fix your football team if they would listen to you from the other side of the television. Yeah, I mean, then the Colts and the Bengals, they'd actually win some games, kind of like Ohio State, right? I mean, because Ohio State rocks, but keep your opinions to yourselves. I have the microphone, right? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, your team would be the best team in the league if only they would listen to you, if only the quarterback would play the way you think they should. But as the saying goes, it's always easier to be an armchair quarterback, isn't it? And here's why, and we know this. The further removed we are from a problem, the simpler the solution seems to be. Because when you zoom out, right, it just seems so easy, which is why you can fix your friends' kids. You know how your friends should be parenting, and if they just did what you said they should do, their kids would be perfect. Or for those of you who are grandparents, you could fix your kids' kids. That's your grandkids, right? And, if only they did what you told them to do or how you raised them. Although ironically, that's kind of an indictment on the way that you raised them. But I mean, if only they would do, you think about that. But if only they would do, right, what you think they should do. But let me just ask a question. This is an all skate. This is for all y'all, right? Do you have any unresolved problems in your own life? Yeah, I mean, do you have any unresolved work issues or relational issues or financial issues? I mean, is there anything unresolved in your world? And we could further ask the question, why aren't those problems resolved? Do you know how we answer that? It's complicated. Yeah, it's complicated, right? Because we see things differently, right? If only you had lived a day in my shoes, if only you grew up with the environment that I grew up in, if only you had prayed the prayers that I've been praying for how many years, right? I mean, if only you could see things from my point of view and know what I've tried and know what hasn't worked and deal with them and the fallout of this and that. I mean, right? It's just complicated. Because when you zoom out, the details become fuzzy and everything seems so easy to understand. But you know this. It's always easier. It's always easier to solve a problem when you're far away from it. It's when you start feeding homeless people and you begin actually working with homeless people that you begin to understand the problems that plague homeless people. It's when you start getting invested in the lives of those who are drug addicts that you begin to understand the complications and maybe the prescription that led them to where they are, that was innocent at one point in time. I mean, it's when you start getting involved in the lives of kids, which our church is so blessed with the people who have been giving their time as CASAs. We went to a fundraiser the other week because our church supports this ministry called Voices for Children. And if you don't know what a CASA is, it's a court-appointed special advocate. And what CASAs do is they come alongside families, particularly children who've been removed from their homes because CPS has stepped in and said this isn't a safe environment for them. And so the CASAs, they get to know the family, they get to know the parents, they listen to the situation, they get to know the children, their foster situation, and then they step in and say, you know what, here's what we think is best for this child. We just want to be an innocent bystander, a third party who can see what's going on, and we want to care for this child. I mean, when you've done that, you understand it's complicated, right? Yeah. When you actually teach kids from drug-addicted parents, right? It's easy to say we shouldn't be providing meals for kids in school, and then you've got kids who come and they're starving and they have no food at home, right? I mean, it's just easy until you've gotten your hands dirty, until you've had the medical issue that's led you into significant medical debt and dealt with the insurance companies as a result of that and had all kinds of stress related to it. Until you've done that, until you've walked a day in those shoes, it's just always easier. It's just always easier when you're standing back and you're zoomed out. We know how to fix things from far away, but when you get closer, you realize it's just far more complicated. It's also always easier, we'll stick this next one up, to solve a problem when you have no skin in the game. All right? I mean, when you're not on the field, when you're not snapping the ball, when you're not catching the passes or throwing, when you're not running the defensive line and holding the line, right? I mean, when you don't have to live with the consequences of decisions, when it's kind of no skin off your back, when you can just dictate what everyone else is doing, but it doesn't impact you personally, when you've got no skin in the game, it's just so much easier to fix things. It's easier to point fingers. And then, from a government level, it's even more complicated because they've got laws and procedures and processes that they have to go by and abide by, which is why it's kind of comical to think we individually can solve this problem. And it's also why we need to be humble as we talk about this. In fact, humility is the key to solving problems, particularly here. There has to be a spirit of humility when we talk about how to move forward as a country. So how do we move forward. But before I tell you what I think the solution is, which I will tell you, it's not just my idea, it comes from Jesus, so, have that there. But before I tell you what I think the solution is, I just want to clarify a couple things, because you may think I'm too pie in the sky, you may think I'm I can't believe what land does he live in? They must only let him out 1 hour a week on Sundays, to come talk. He just lives in this dreamland. And before you think I'm apolitical, because I'm not. In fact, if you want to sit down and hear about my politics, I'll tell you all about my politics, and I'll tell you about everything else I have an opinion on, which is pretty much everything, okay? So I have lots of opinions. I am not saying Christians shouldn't be involved in politics. I am not saying that we shouldn't vote for great candidates, that we shouldn't try and pass good laws and have great, people serving our country and all that good stuff, right? I mean, vote your conscience, please. We live in a country where we can even have this conversation. I mean, that's a freedom many people across the world don't have. So please don't misunderstand this. But I am telling you, the answer does not come down to politics. Because there is a point, we come to a point where laws are only as good as the people who follow them, right? I mean, you can have all the best laws in the world, right? You can have laws on gun control and immigration and racial reconciliation, and you can have laws on equality or equity or whatever you want to call it, right? I mean, you can have all kinds of laws, but having good laws is only half the equation, because if people aren't obeying the laws, right? I mean, it just doesn't really matter. If people don't follow the laws, it's not going to fix anything. The problem in America isn't necessarily laws. The problem in America is what I would call a heart problem. It's a heart problem. And it's not just a heart problem in those other people. It's not just a heart problem in the Democrats or in the Republicans it's a heart problem in we, the people. Like, all of us, regardless of our political persuasion, the problem starts here. Regardless of your family background, regardless of your political leanings or your party of choice, regardless of your socioeconomic status or what race you come from, regardless of all those things, the issue begins right here. Now again, this isn't my idea. This comes from Jesus, and we're going to take a look at what Jesus had to say about this here in just a couple minutes. But Jesus came from the nation of Israel, which was a nation of laws. There were 10 really common ones. Anybody remember what those were called? The 10 Commandments. Yeah, I mean, those are just laws, essentially, that were created to help in this covenant relationship. The 10 Commandments were the basis of this covenant relationship between God and his people, his chosen people, the nation of Israel, not the nation of America, just to clarify that, okay? So these 10 Commandments were the way that God interacted with so that people could have a right relationship both with him, and this was so extraordinary when these were written, that they would have a good relationship not just with him, but with the people around them. Because the people around them were people that God cared for and cared about, and other people in the nation of Israel, God valued those people. And it was just revolutionary when the 10 Commandments came out, because before, there was no respect of other people. There was no respect of where other people stood, but the 10 Commandments, they just changed things. And so over time, the nation of Israel did kind of what we do. We come up with all kinds of new laws to begin controlling people when people aren't doing what it is that we think they should be doing. And ultimately, those laws fell short. And so Jesus, when he stepped onto the scene, he said something that if you grew up in church, you've probably heard this before. This isn't new information, but I think we sometimes forget the significance of what he said. And here's what he said. It's recorded in Mark chapter 7, verse 21. He says, "For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come." Right? The bad thoughts that you and I have, they originate on the inside. When you think something unkind or unloving, when you think a nasty thought about someone else or something impure, it all begins on the inside at the heart level. And then he starts listing a bunch of issues that, as we go through this list, we kind of already saw the list a little bit earlier, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. He lists these things that are the problems that come from within. And here's what he says. He gives this list. He says, sexual immorality, which we talked about a month ago. If you missed it, you should go back. That was an interesting one. Theft. Who would have thought that theft would become such a problem in America, whether it's carburetor theft or car theft or just store theft, off the shelves theft or identity theft, right? There's just theft all over the place. Murder. Not a weekend goes by where you don't turn on the news and you just think, oh my goodness, what have we become in Chicago and New Orleans? In Indianapolis, the Greenwood Park Mall, I mean, it's just everywhere. Murder, adultery, greed, the assumption that it's all for my consumption. Malice, which is doing kind of hateful things toward other people and unkind things toward other people. Deceit, lying to other people. Lewdness, airdropping nude photos of yourself to somebody on an airplane or sending them through Snapchat, right? I mean, that's what lewdness is. Envy, wanting what other people have. Slander, saying unkind things right behind social media because they can't respond back and we can't see how they respond. And I mean, look at the discourse that we have in our country. Arrogance, lack of humility, and folly. Do you know what folly is? Folly is living foolishly. It's living with the belief that my decision right now is about me right now and no one else, and it doesn't connect to tomorrow. We've talked about this before. It's the failure to connect the dots in the way I'm living today and how it impacts my tomorrow, and not just my tomorrow, but the tomorrow of everybody around me, the sphere of people around me. It's unwise living. It's failing to ask the question, if I continue down this path, where will it take me? If our country continues down this path, where will it take us? That's folly. Folly doesn't connect the dots. He goes on, he says, all these evils come from, what's this word? Inside. And they defile a person. That means they make you unholy. They set you at odds with God. They make you unclean before God. It's what happens inside, because it doesn't just stay inside, does it? It begins to work itself outside. Jesus' point is that these thoughts that we have, they manifest themselves into actions, and those actions move us in a direction. Now, did that hit the nail on the head with America or what? But here's the thing, that didn't just hit the nail on the head with America, because Jesus wasn't talking to America, right? He was talking to the Pharisees. He was talking to the Israelite people who lived in the Roman Empire. I mean, he hit the nail on the head with the Israelites. He hit the nail on the head with the Romans. He hit the nail on the head with every civilization known to man. The problem, what is it? We all have a heart problem. And how do you fix heart problems? Do you make more laws? Say the beatings will continue until, your morale improves, right? Until you start doing what I want you to do. Sometimes families do that, right? With parents, beatings will continue until you smile and say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. Doesn't work necessarily that way, right? Or here's an interesting thing to think about. If you were God and the problems that we just kind of talked about, your people were experiencing those and they had a heart problem, how would you solve it? I mean, if you were God and you cared deeply about these people, how would you resolve this heart problem? Would you solve it from far away where the details are fuzzy and, you can just, wave a magic wand or, and everything's fixed? Or would you do something different? Would you actually get your hands dirty? Would you wade into the situation? Would you send your son and say, let me come, not to prove a point, because proving points is really easy. We're really good at it. All of us, right? Social media, we're fantastic at proving our points and making our statements and our mic drops. Would you send your son to prove a point? Of course not. God didn't send Jesus to prove a point, but to make a difference. To make a difference in the lives of people that you care so much about. And God didn't answer this question from far away. He came very, very near. The book of John, which is the Gospel of John, and it means the good news according to John. Essentially, it's the biography of Jesus' life that was written by John. There are 4 of those. We talked about those. But when John wrote about Jesus coming to earth, he says, in the beginning, right, before anything was created, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. He talks about how Jesus is beginning to describe Jesus, how Jesus existed eternally because he's part of this Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And then he took on flesh and he came in the form of light and life. Those are the words that John used to describe Jesus. And here's what he said, John chapter 1, verse 5. He says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. What's funny is we think America is dark right now, and it may be. I'm not making any judgments on that. There are certainly dark places in America right now. But when you think about what the world was like 2,000 years ago, the darkness that Jesus stepped into, in a world where it was believed that there are some people who just for their own good should be owned by other people, it's self-evident that some people should be owned by others for their own good. That was the belief of the Roman Empire. The husband's primary sexual partner wouldn't be their spouse, their wife. If you had a baby and you didn't want the baby because it was a girl, because typically that's the ones that they didn't want, and I'm just explaining the Roman Empire, it was considered acceptable to go drop your baby off in the woods where the fates would decide what happened to the baby. And it wasn't your fault because the fates decided, right? Unfortunately, typically those babies didn't survive. But that was just normal. I mean, that was acceptable behavior. Talk about the darkness of that world, where men were considered so much better than women and children and slaves. I mean, men were just on this pedestal. And we look at that and we say, how could people think that way? How could people do such things? It was dark. It was an unfathomably dark world. And Jesus came to bring light. The text continues. It says, the Word became flesh, and he made his dwelling among us. That God, who is eternally existent, put on a body, God in a bod, right? Came in the form of Jesus, and he made his dwelling. Now, the Greek word for the word dwelling is actually the word tabernacled, which means absolutely nothing to us. So the English translators helped us out by saying dwelling. But the tabernacle was actually the place years before Jesus came where people would go to meet with God. When they had offense against God or an offense against a neighbor, they would go to the tabernacle to offer their sacrifices and meet with God there. And so what John was saying is, look, when Jesus came to earth, we realized there was something unique and different about him, that this truly was God. Like God was dwelling here. Just as God tabernacled among the Israelite people years ago, God is now living among us. We have looked at him eyeball to eyeball. We know he is God. God came near. He goes on, he says, we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. He didn't just come to illuminate the darkness. He came to extinguish it and to bring freedom and light and life to all who would receive him. And the way he did it was not by condemning. He could have. He had every right to. From God, zoomed out, right? I mean, he had every right to condemn everything that was going on the earth. But instead, he came differently. He didn't come to reform the government. He didn't come to replace Caesar. He didn't come to try and get the right people elected into the Roman Senate to change things. He didn't come to manipulate the world. He didn't come to use the methods of darkness to change the dark world. You know how he extinguished the darkness? By wading into the darkness. He didn't solve problems from far off. He came near. And he spent the first 30 years of his life listening and observing and being present. And then when the right time came, do you know how he extinguished the darkness? He demonstrated light. He lived differently. He showed what God's like. He showed how God cares about those who are far off and how God reaches out to them. He showed how God responds to those who the plight of the weak and the humble. He showed how God's heart breaks over brokenness and wants to restore what's broken. He revealed something very different about God. And then he told his followers, here's what I want you to do. I want you to follow me. I want you to do what I did. Don't just know me. Don't just know what I care about. Don't just know the things that I say. Follow me. Put this into practice. Do this. Live it out. Let me be your true north. Look to me for your direction in life. And when you do this, you will join with the Jesus followers across the globe, that span the history of humanity, as you discover that there is a different way of being. As Jesus was training his disciples, there was a point in time where, he hadn't really revealed who he was fully, and there's some question about, okay, who is this guy? We know he's a good teacher. We know he can perform miracles. Clearly he's from God, but we're not really sure what's going on. And Jesus asked them, he says, who do you guys think I am? And Simon Peter, he spoke up. Here's what Peter said. He said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Like, I've figured it out, Jesus. You're the one we've been waiting for. You're the anointed one. Like, you are God, right? I've looked you eyeball to eyeball. I've seen the miracles you performed. I've figured it out. You truly are God. You remind us that God is alive and well, that he cares. He's not on vacation. He's not asleep. He hasn't forgotten about us, that you are God. And Jesus celebrated this moment. Here's what he said. He said, Jesus replied, Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. You didn't figure this out. God helped you figure it out. And then he goes on, he says, and I tell you that you are Peter, which is kind of a weird thing to say, right? It's like, you are Sean, you are John, you are Dick, you are, it's like, yeah, that's who I am, right? I mean, that makes sense to us. But that wasn't his name at this point in time. His name was Simon, son of Jonah. And Jesus is like, look, what you've just said is so momentous. Like, you've finally figured it out. I am God in flesh. You finally figured it out, so I'm going to change your name. Your name, it's going to be a name that had never been a name before, Peter, which means rock. It's like naming somebody Rocky, but nobody's been named Rocky before, right? And so Rocky here, I mean, he's just made this incredible realization. And he goes on, he says, I tell you that you're Rocky, and on this rock, not Rocky, but on what you've just said, that I'm the Christ, the Son of the living God, I will build my church. Like, my gathering of people will be built on this concept that I am who you just said I am. And the church isn't a building, the church is a gathering. And it's not united by political affiliation or denomination or Democrat or Republican or race or socioeconomic status or gender identity or anything other than the person of Jesus. That's what unites us. The acceptance of Jesus as the Son of God. He's like, you figured it out, Peter. God helped you do it. And he says, and the gates of Hades, death itself, the realm of the dead, will not overcome it. This is an eternal truth that will last forever. The people who are part of my kingdom will last forever. And they began being united around the lordship of Jesus. And his followers watched him live a life unlike anybody they had ever seen before. I mean, it was just so different. It was so unique because he didn't leverage power for himself. He leveraged power for the good of other people. They had in their minds what a Messiah would be, right? I mean, when Peter made this call, he recognized who Jesus was, but he totally misunderstood who Jesus was. Because right after this, Jesus began teaching them what the Messiah was. Here's what the text continues to say. From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that continuing on, that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life. I mean, he's teaching about what he came to do. And Peter's like, no, that's not what you came to do. No, Jesus, I think you've misunderstood this. You don't even know what your job is. Let me tell you. So Peter took him aside, continuing on, and he began to rebuke him. He's like, no. That's not how this works out, Jesus, right? I mean, never, Lord, he said, this shall never happen to you. That's not what powerful people do. Powerful people don't lay down their lives and die and stuff. I mean, powerful people leverage their authority for their own good. That's what pathetic people do, Jesus. You're not pathetic. You're powerful. You're the Messiah. I just told you, you're the Son of God. And Jesus turned to him. You grew up in church, you know this. Jesus turned to him, and here's what he said. Not the most encouraging things. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. Like, you're trying to lead me the wrong direction. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Peter, you're looking at it from a human vantage point. That's what the powerful people in the world do. They use their authority to control other people, to leverage it over other people. But I did not come to do that. I came to give my life. I am here to illuminate this dark world, and I'm going to do it in a very different way than you think, because I'm going to lay down my life for the Democrats, for the Republicans, for the Americans, for the people of all the countries, all the people of the world, red and yellow, black and white. They are precious in my sight. I'm here to demonstrate something different, Peter. He goes on, Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple, if you're going to be my follower, if you're going to, know what I know and do what I do, you're going to have to follow me. You're going to have to deny yourself. That's going to, you're just going to have to say no to your agenda and yes to my agenda. No to you, yes to me. No to you, yes to me. You must deny yourself and take up their cross. Like you're going to willingly lay down your life. It's not going to be taken from you. You're going to give it up. You're going to take up your cross and you're going to follow me and walk in my footsteps and do the things that I do. And you're going to be different than the people of this world. And you're going to teach others to do the same. And this was so offensive and this was so misunderstood, and they so did not get it. You know, you'd think after somebody says to you, get behind me, Satan, right? I mean, that would kind of get your attention. But even as close to Jesus' crucifixion as the night he was betrayed, right? And Jesus, he took off his outer garments, he put on a robe, a towel, and he knelt down and he washed his disciples' feet, and he got to Peter, and Peter's like, no, powerful people don't wash feet. I think you got this wrong, Jesus. I don't want you washing my feet. And then as Jesus was, you know the angry mob that came to attack Jesus, and they came with their swords and pitchforks and torches. And, and they expected Jesus to, put up a fight. Peter expected Jesus to put up a fight, which is why he pulled his sword out and cut off a guy's ear. And Jesus is like, no, this is not my way. James and John, shortly before all this happened, James and John had a little meeting with Jesus. They're like, Jesus, we know you're going to be in power at some point in time. How would you feel if we were at your left and right? Would that be okay? Because we know what powerful people do, and we'd like to be in that spot. And Jesus is like, no, this is not my way. You don't understand. You don't know what you're asking. And it was only after he was crucified, only after he came back to life, that things finally started clicking. And they're like, oh, that's what you meant when you said you're going to have to give up your life, right? Oh, that's what you meant when you said take up your cross. Like, oh, that's what it meant. And Jesus' final words to the disciples before he left the earth, and our last words, they're kind of the most important things we say, hopefully. Here's what Jesus told them about. Here's Matthew chapter 28. Jesus came to them, and he said, look, all authority, all power, like every powerful thing that exists, all of that's been given to me. All in heaven and on earth, it's been given to me. Nothing has been withheld from me. I have all the power in the world, in the universe, in creation. So he says, in light of that, therefore, go and make. Now don't fill this in, because some of you're church people, and you know what this gets filled in with. But just imagine with me for a minute. Could you imagine Jesus saying, okay, in light of all that I've just demonstrated for you, in light of all that I've told you, I want you to go and I want you to make America great again. I want you to make more Democrats. I want you to make some really solid conservatives. I want you to make some great people who could be political candidates to fill the president of the United States, right? He says, therefore, go and make disciples. Followers, people who don't just know, but people who do. People who know my truths and put them into practice. He said, I want you to go and make disciples of all nations, not just the American people, of all people, not just the Jewish people, because that was their context, but all people. I want you to go make disciples of all nations. He says, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded. And the great news is Jesus made it really easy for us, right? Because he took all those laws and he kind of broke them down into two real simple ones. John talked about them last week. Love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. In fact, Jesus on his, last night he's with his disciples. He's like, guys, I've got a new command for you. This is it. If you can figure this out, you've got it figured out. All you need to do is love one another as I've loved you. Right? Look at the way that I've cared for you and the way I've sacrificed myself for you and given my life for you. And if you can just figure that out, you got it, right? That's what making disciples is about, helping people to understand what that is. To love and live like Jesus. Not to leverage your power and authority over other people, but to leverage your life for the good of other people, to give to others, to serve in humility, rather than thinking you know everything. Teach and baptize and follow and obey. And he continues on, he says, and surely when you do this, I love this promise. It's like, there's no doubt here. He says, and surely I am with you always, even to the end of the age. When you do this, when you understand my command, when you live that out, when you make disciples, when you focus on what I want you to focus on, my presence goes with you. And I will strengthen you. You don't have to do it on your own. But when you do this, you are going to turn the world upside down. And you know what I think is so great? You know what happened. They went out and they tried to change Rome, didn't they? Right? They tried to reform the Sanhedrin, the authorities, right? They tried to get their people elected. Is that what the New Testament followers of Jesus did? Of course not. They went out and tried to live the way Jesus taught them to live and tell others that this guy came and he died and he gave his life and he came back to life and we saw it and take my word for it, and I'm willing to give my life for it. He told me I would do that one day and I didn't believe him, but here I am offering my life, laying it down. And as people's hearts changed, the world changed. It soon became not self-evident that everybody should be owned, or some people should be owned by other people for their own benefit. It suddenly became illegal to drop your children off in the woods for the fates to decide what would happen to them. We get to the place where, we talk about some of this stuff and we're disgusted to imagine that children and women were not on the same level of men. I mean, it just doesn't even seem right. How did the world change? Ask any historian how Western civilization came about and how the Roman world collapsed. It was the Christians who began living things out. The Christians, and their life was inspiring. Their way of life was absolutely inspiring. Because they said, I'm not concerned about getting sick. I'll care for the sick people, the powerful people of the Roman world. They're like, I don't want to get the cooties of the sick people. They established hospitals. They began, everybody's on the verge of starvation 2,000 years ago, but they would go out into the woods and adopt these children who had been left to the fates, and they would bring them into their homes. They sacrificed themselves. It was the Christians, not the Democrats, not the Republicans, not the Americans that changed the world 2,000 years ago. It was Jesus followers. And when we lose sight of that, and when we try to use the world's ways to change our world, we make a mistake. If we want to fix America, we have to realize that the problem is a heart problem. And laws do not change hearts. Only Jesus changes hearts. Parents, you know that, right? I mean, when you leave your kids somewhere else and when you're not home, if there's not a heart desire to do what the rules of your house are, what are they going to do? When the cat's away, the mouse will play. Okay, 2 of you knew that. Okay, the rest of us, when the cat's away, the mouse will play. We know, right? And we know that phrase because we've lived it. We've felt it. If the heart isn't right, it doesn't matter what laws we have. We're all crooked deep down. In fact, just look at the person next to you and say, you're crooked, right? I mean, just go ahead, because it's true. We're all crooked deep down, which is why we all need a heart renovation. And if we consider ourselves better than someone else, right, we lose our humility. And then we focus on fixing people, right? And we focus on fixing things. And the reality is when we focus on fixing things, we miss out. We mischaracterize, we misjudge. Jesus didn't come to fix people. In fact, let's get the next slide up here. If Jesus didn't come with a priority of reforming behavior, because that doesn't work, it doesn't last. He came to change hearts, but he understood something important, that when hearts change, behavior is reformed, right? When our hearts begin changing, that's when the behavior changes. And sometimes we Christians, we kind of make the mistake of thinking it's the church's job to fix other people and fix their behavior and fix the laws of our land and fix, politics. Jesus didn't try to reform Rome. You know who leveraged the government to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish? The Pharisees, when they crucified Jesus. They used the government, they leveraged the government to accomplish their nefarious means. That was not Jesus' way. And so when we get so focused on our point of view over the people God told us to care about, your point of view is less important than the you next to you. The you go to school with, the you whose kids play on, your kid's team, the you share a cubicle with, the you who lives across the street from you. I mean, when we get so focused on our point of view that we devalue the you, we have missed it. We have misunderstood what Jesus was about. And what we do is we communicate that you behaving right matters more than you, right? I mean, you just obeying what I want you, and what is that? That's control. And Jesus didn't say, go out and control the world. So go out and make disciples, make followers. We just communicate, well, basically, we just want to control you. As long as we can control you, everything will be great. Where fixing starts is in the heart. Make disciples. Don't force people. Invite people. Introduce them to me. and lead them toward me. So I want to ask you a question as we close, and before we stick it up there, I don't want you to write this off. I don't want you to just move past it. I want you to really think about it. I hope you'll take it with you this week and pray about it and just ask God about it. Ask him to show himself to you in this question. And the question is, where have you allowed your point of view to matter more than a you next to you? Like, where have you been so focused on getting your agenda passed, whether it's political or not, I don't know. But in the process, you've devalued a human being that Jesus told us. He commanded us. That was his command, to go out and love others as I have loved you. Where have you elevated your point of view over a person? That's the point where fixing America starts. It could be that you need to ask forgiveness from someone. Say you're sorry. Maybe you've posted something online you need to take down because it was about proving a point, but in the process you alienated people. Maybe there's a bumper sticker you need to remove from your car or a sign you need to take out of your yard. Let's get that question back up there because I just want to rest on this. Where have you allowed your point of view to matter more than a you next to you? That's the place where it starts. And we're going to pick it up from there. Let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, this is heavy and it's hard because we love our country. I love my country. And we just want to fix it, right? I mean, we want to step into the government and get some things done differently. And the reality is that's not how the world changed 2,000 years ago. There were men and women who carried the name Christ follower, became known as the Christians, who changed the world not because they changed politics, but because of how they lived and how they loved those around them. And Father, my guess is there are people in the room, myself included, who have at times elevated our point of view over a person. Would you forgive us for that? Would you help us to refocus on what you've called us to do? To be your light, to illuminate the darkness by the way we live, by the way we love, by the way we care for others, by the way we leverage what you have given us for the good of others. And in doing so, God, would you change our country and move us in the direction of you? Give each one of us the wisdom to know what we need to do with what we've heard today. And Father, give us the strength to do it and the courage to do it. And we pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.